Welcome, dear viewer. I hope you are having a wonderful night. Tonight, I'll be telling some terrifyingly scary stories. I hope you are warm and ready. Let's begin. I was lucky enough to live in a large house when I was a kid. My father was a physical therapist. My house had a side room on the back side of the first floor. My siblings called it the second living room because that's basically what it was. It had an old recliner, a small table, and a medium-sized couch. That's it. We hardly ever sat in there. One morning, I woke up sick. I told my mom, and she told me to take the day off from school and stay home. My siblings had to be at school, and my parents worked, so that meant I had the house to myself. I laid around in bed for a few hours, until around 10:30 a.m., when I heard steady walking coming from my first floor. I thought nothing of it at first, as I just assumed maybe my mom went in late, like she did sometimes. I needed something to eat anyway, so I stood up and went downstairs to the kitchen. I made it about 3 feet in front of my kitchen walk-in doorway when I locked eyes with, not my mom, but a 6-foot-tall man, wearing raggy and ripped-up clothes. I was frozen in fear. I just stood there. It was only for a few seconds, but it felt like hours had passed. The guy just stood there and watched me too. No expression or anything. I eventually pulled myself out of the shock and bolted for my bedroom upstairs. I didn't hear him following me, but I got into my bedroom, locked the door, and moved my dresser in front of it anyway. I pulled out my phone, and instead of calling 911 like I should have done, I called my mom. I screamed into the phone, telling her someone was in the house trying to kill me. She told me not to leave my room for any reason and to call the police. So I did. 15 minutes later, the police finally showed up, as I could see through my bedroom window. I watched them enter the house before I left my room to run down to them for safety. I told them everything that happened. They did a quick search of the house and found nothing. Not a single person or a broken window or door. My parents both came home shortly after and were absolutely furious that the guy was not caught. I was extremely angry as well, but I was also relieved that I was alive. The police began packing their things, but as one of the last officers was on the way out, he noticed a Walmart bag sticking out from under our couch. It was that damn couch in the side room. And well, what do you know? We found hundreds of trash bags and week-old rotting food under the coach, along with some other personal items like wipes, water bottles, and even a bag of piss. A goddamn bag of piss. Whoever that man in the kitchen was had been living under our couch for weeks. I cannot comprehend how none of my family members smelled any of the garbage that was piled up under there the entire time. The fact that he never made a single noise under there also baffles the hell out of me. We've since cleaned that room out completely and turned it into a breakfast nook with wooden chairs, so no more shitheads can break in and find free housing in them. I go off to college in a few months, so I won't have to live in fear of that incident happening again much longer. But I still think about it every time I wake up with a cough. This is going to be a rather lengthy story, so please bear with me, guys. Back when I was in my early to mid-teens, around 2007 or 2008, me and a bunch of friends would regularly hang out at an old abandoned school. A very small school with only 8 classrooms, a teacher's room, a cafeteria, 2 bathrooms, and 1 room. We had no idea what was in since it was always locked, but I'll get back to that later. This school hadn't been able to keep up with the 80s modernization of our town and the large number of newcomers that followed with it. And as such, it quickly closed down in favor of new schools and buildings by the end of the 80s. Most of the place was boarded up completely, but you could enter through a window in one of the classrooms where the board had been ripped down. Our routine was always the same. Whoever of us got off school first would go down to the building and go through the different rooms to make sure everything was empty and safe, as these buildings had earlier been known as the local spot for drug addicts, and using needles and such was a common sight for us by this point. So this one day, me and a friend of mine were the first to get out of school, and as per usual, we took the walk down to the building. But upon entering and stepping out of the classroom and into the hallway, we immediately saw a large man. I remember him as quite huge, but that might possibly be how he appeared to us as kids, and my friend let out a huge scream. The man doesn't appear shocked or scared and doesn't seem to react to us. But he turns to look at us and then asks, "Have you guys seen Jamie?" We tell the guy that we haven't seen anyone and only just got there, to which he sighs and shrugs and then pushes past us to leave the same way we just entered. Now, our friend has an unusual name, so the chances that this guy was just looking for another random guy who just happened to have the same name were pretty low. But none of us had ever seen this guy before, and I happen to know most of said friend's family as well. When we described what the guy looked like to our friend, he didn't seem to know who this guy could have been either, and for the next few months, we were too scared to go back. When we did return about 3 to 4 months later, it was the middle of summer vacation, and we thought it would be fun to climb up on the roof of the building and sunbathe. Upon climbing it, we found the roof to be rather weak and close to caving in, but something made us take the risk and dare to venture out on the roof after all. A hole in the roof, which we figured would have to be directly above the room we'd never been in. The hole in the roof was only about the size of a football, and one of my friends came up with the idea to lower her arm down into the hole and film the room using her phone so that we could all see what the room looked like. She puts her arm down, and as she is filming, she suddenly lets out a blood-curdling scream and immediately retracts her arm. But her phone is no longer to be seen. She was certain that something had knocked it from her hand, and as we looked down through the hole, we could see her phone laying on the floor. We climbed down from the roof and entered the building, now intent on doing whatever it would take to get in the room, so our friend wouldn't have to return home without a phone and have to explain what happened. About 30 minutes later, we finally managed to make a hole in the door and put our hands inside. And when we try to use the door handle on the inside of the door now opens without any trouble. We step inside and we all stare in silence. To this day, I have no idea what this room was doing in a school building, and I sincerely hope it has never been used for what it looked like it was intended for. The room is about 4 by 4 meters, and the floor and walls are all made of solid concrete. In the left corner of the room from where we entered were 2 metal bowls sitting on the floor, and at the back of the room were 5 chains dangling from the wall. 4 with equal-sized cuffs and 1 large that looked like it would fit around a neck. Needless to say, we swiftly picked up my friend's phone and immediately left the place. However, the room had us both scared but also slightly intrigued. So after some talk back and forth that same night, we decided to go back to look at it again the following day. When we returned the next day, we found the door to be locked once again, and someone had covered the hole we made in the door with a large wooden board nailed to the door. Once again, we immediately left, and after that visit, we never returned. I have no idea what we stumbled upon that day, but I am certain my days hanging out at this place are what sparked my interest in abandoned places. Today, I am an experienced member of the Urbex community and have had much more sinister experiences with places like this that I might share with all some other time. Since taking up Urbex, it has been a dream of mine to go back to that school and check if that room was still there, but unfortunately, the place no longer exists, and the area is now home to a thrift store. So, this is another one of my experiences from working as an overnight security guard at the local port. If you all want more context on the setting, my other story is on this subreddit under the name Traumatizing Night Shift. For those of you who know the setting already, this is another experience that scared the absolute crap out of me. This did not happen to me firsthand since it happened to one of my coworkers, but since that incident happened during my shift, I would fear to even go use the restroom alone. So, just to recap on the setting, the local port has a radius of nearly 2 miles, and there are 3 overnight security guards on the shift, including me. We were all at the front gate post, and it's about the size of a trailer home. The front gate post is separated from everything else on the site. Buildings, slabs, offices, the oil rigs, everything. It's the entry point to the entire industrial park. The offices and restrooms are about walking distance from our post, and it's really dark since there wasn't really any illumination around. Around 2 a.m., the lieutenant walked out of the post to go use the restroom. The restrooms are deep in the center of the offices. The offices carry a very creepy vibe because they were constructed around the 1950s. So the wooden floorboards and walls were still the style there. About 7 minutes later, me and Mike look out of the post window to find our lieutenant sprinting back to the post. At first, we thought it was hilarious since he's a chubby dude, so we found it funny watching him run. Then a realization started to kick in. The lieutenant was the one who let out the fact that this site was haunted. He said that he's seen things and that they don't really startle him that much anymore. We slowly began to imagine and wonder what the fuck he had seen or heard. It scared the shit out of this guy. I mean, it must have been bad enough for him to be running back in a very hysterical manner. The lieutenant opens the door to the post that me and Mike are in, and we are both speechless and just staring at him while he catches his breath. After catching his breath, he tells us this is the last time that I will ever use the restrooms in the office building. I was taking a shit in the third stall, and then I heard the restroom door swivel open. I thought it was one of you, so I simply ignored it. But the thing is, I did not hear any footsteps. I was listening to music, but I paused it to see if I could hear anything. A few seconds went by and nothing, and then I heard the water faucet go off by itself. Then, a few seconds later, the air dryer also went off. I finished my business, and I ran back as fast as I could. Because I knew it wasn't either of you in there. The creepier part about this is that both the water faucet and the hand dryer are motion activated. So in order for them to have gone off, something must have triggered it. Before this incident, I was already skeptical about using that restroom alone. I hated taking shite at work during my night shift because I was always anticipating something creepy like this to happen to me. The worst part is that when you're taking a shit, you're in a vulnerable position. Also, those restrooms are way too deep in the building, and it's pitch black inside. You would need a flashlight to go inside, and it's really quiet and creepy. Hey, I want to start my first post off with a little bit about me, as it helps in context with the story. I'm a 22-year-old person working in the medical field. I'm a floater medical technician at the moment, which means I get a schedule every week going to different assisted living facilities, skilled nursing facilities, independent living facilities, all the living facilities that usually hold a majority of elderly people, and help with vaccinations and general patient care involving medications all around my state. Sometimes I'm only 30 minutes from home, but I've driven 3 hours before, and most times, they drag on long into the night. Being that I'm not really that picky, and I know how to handle myself, and money is money, I usually don't mind the drive. My parents would drive 4 hours to a location for a day trip, and that same day, we would drive back. Nothing too crazy though. It can get a little tiring after working 6 days in a row. Now that you know how I work, I guess I'll tell you about where I live. No names, but I'm basically in the foothills or mountains with lots of back roads and lots of trees. I know, typical of scary stories. The middle of nowhere with spooky trees. But once again, I don't think much of it. I've lived around forests all my life, and I see them as peaceful rather than scary. So I finish up this particular clinic at around 6 p.m. And as you know, if you live up north in the winter, it's dark by then. But once again, I'm thinking nothing of it. But even so, I'm tired, hungry, and ready to go to bed. My team calls it a day, and I set up to take my hour and 45-minute drive home. The first 30 minutes, I'm in town, then on a highway, so pretty nice smooth sailing, listening to lofi music as per usual. using it as my decompression and meditative time. I keep driving. Then I notice a huge crash up ahead, like a 4 or 5 car pileup. Real nasty on this busy highway. So I take an exit off the highway, going to drive around it so I can get home and into my bed quicker, rather than sit and wait for them to clear a path from one of the lanes. Anyway, I start driving through this town, which honestly looks like maybe 3 freaking people live in it. All the buildings are run down, and the road is so messed up it's awful. My car's poor tires and hydraulic system were begging for me to stop, so I had to slow down a lot so as not to stress my car. It's dark and really old, but again, places like this exist. A town on its last breath. I've seen them more than a few times living up and down the East Coast in less than shitty neighborhoods. I'm not going to judge, but I will note that this place is just really, really empty. No cars, no lights, boarded up houses. Just empty. I'm driving between 15 and 20 miles an hour. My brights on so I can see. It's a clear night, so I have that going for me. As I'm driving past this big fire department overrun with bare trees, a loud thunk comes from the roof of my car. Great. I quickly pull over into the parking lot of the abandoned fire department. Wonderful, I'm thinking. Get sideswiped by a random dude at a rest stop and dent the top of my poor Orangeberry in 1 week. I open the door in a panic, expecting to see some tree branches denting my roof. But nope. Nope, nothing. Which is weird enough as is, I'm like, what the hell? I knew something had hit my roof, so I go to check behind my car. Maybe it rolled off. Maybe it was a bird or a bat that fell and then flew away. There are a lot of trees around here. I walk all around my car. Look at the messed up road. Nothing. I chalk it up to the winged animal idea and climb back in my car. A little rattled, so it's silent as I get repositioned. That's when I heard this ear-piercing shriek. I'm talking. Someone is screaming so loudly that it sounds like their vocal cords could break. I lock my door and start getting back on the road. Calm down, I'm thinking. Bobcats are everywhere. You've heard what they sound like. Plainy, like a woman crying bloody murder. It's just a bobcat. It's just a bobcat. My hands are shaking, and I'm trying to drive out of there as fast as I can. Just a bobcat. Some kids playing a prank, some homeless tweaker. My car was rattling back and forth as I got up to a comfortable 35 miles an hour. Of course, that's me, pushing it for my abused car. I'd make it up to him later with a nice wash. I drive another mile through this town, and I'm a few miles from the exit to the highway again. I'm mentally kicking myself for being so scared. Like a little pansy, I'm freaking out over some animals. I'm a mile away now, thanks to the helpful, yet very beat up and weathered signs. I'm calming down. Nothing crazy. Maybe it would be a good idea to play my Lofty again. As I paused that 24/7 livestream 1 from YouTube when I got out of my car. Just as I reach for my phone in the passenger side seat, something rushes past my headlights. I scream and brake hard. I don't know why. It was yards away from me, in the very distant part of my headlights. All right, that's the final straw. I'm crying at this point, shaking so hard I can barely grip the wheel, my eyes blurry with tears. I don't care about the music anymore. And even though I'm still reminding myself that animals inhabit tree-dense abandoned towns all the time, this situation was still enough to get me crying. I keep driving, trying to focus on getting to that damn highway. But that's when I see it. If it's a human, then it's not like any human I've ever seen. On the side of the road, it seemed to stand so politely on the sidewalk, as if waiting for me to pass so it could cross the street. Was this a tall thing? It had sunken facial features and looked naked. Loose skin, a lot of it. Sagging down its legs and arms, piling at the wrists, ankles, and knees, around its neck and hanging from its jaw. I saw it for half a second before I slammed my foot down on the gas. Sorry, Orangeberry, like I said, I'd make it up to you. I'm screaming obscenities now. Fuck this. Fuck that. What the fuck? What the fuck? You get the idea. My emotional outpouring was excessive. Goosebumps covered me from head to toe, tears rolling down my face, and hands gripping my steering wheel so tight there's nail marks in it. I swerved onto the highway and recklessly entered the other lane. I drive at 80 for a little bit before eventually slowing down and pulling over to the side of the road to sob and call my dad. He picks up instantly, and when he hears my crying, he's all concerned, trying to get my story. I explained everything. I called it a man in some scary monster costume. And my dad instructed me to call the police, which I didn't really want to do. I was already a nervous wreck. Had I had to explain it or even go back with someone? Absolutely, F that. But my dad insisted, so I called the cops. I tell them, I saw a man in the town back there off the exit, in a costume. He scared me really bad, and after a few more questions, the cops said they'd check it out and sent me on my way. No, I can't be sure it wasn't a costume. No, I can't be sure it wasn't some weird outfit and bad lighting at night. No, I'm not saying all of these events were connected in some way, but what I am saying is that it all happened so quickly that it was hard to dismiss as nothing. And if this was a costume, it had to be a damn good costume. It had to be a damn good costume because it was hyper realistic, and I saw every single fold and wrinkle, and could even make out a couple blue veins. I don't even remember the name of the town. I haven't gotten a call back from the police about any updates. If there was anyone found with a costume on stalking the side of the road in a beat-up town at 7 p.m. It happened about a month ago, and I'm better now. As long as I'm in my car, I'm safe, but I no longer feel safe being outside of my car at night. Not even the short walk from my front door to my driveway is safe anymore. I'll start shaking and panting if I'm outside in the dark alone for more than 5 seconds. I don't know who to tell or what to believe, but at the very least, I hope you guys found it entertaining. Thank you for your time. I have a family friend who owns a beautiful and very old house in a wealthy suburb of a large city. She was going on vacation, and her husband was leaving for a business trip, so she asked me to cat sit for her. I had done it for her before and adored the house and area, so I agreed. The house appeared very small and quaint from the street, but was actually very rambling, had a bizarre layout, and never seemed to end. The basement was a walkout with 2 doors and 2 staircases that led to the main floor. This house was so weirdly designed that you would find rooms, hallways, and doors you didn't even realize existed, even after days of staying there. I spent most of my time in the front room of the home, which had a very large window facing the street and no curtains. One night, I was studying on the couch in the front room, in front of the window. It was so pitch black out that I couldn't see anything outside, even though I was just inches away from the window. I started to feel extremely on edge and uncomfortable, like I was being observed. Around 2:30 a.m., I shut off all of the lights in the house and retired to a small bedroom on the middle right side of the main floor that had a window with blinds. I watched a few videos on YouTube, making sure to leave the door open a crack because the cats like to come in and out throughout the night. I thought I heard a male voice coming from the basement at one point, but I dismissed it as me being creeped out about being alone in this old rambling house. Around 3 a.m., I decide to shut everything down and go to bed. For the first time in hours, the house was completely quiet because I was no longer reciting information to myself during study or watching any loud videos. However, that silence was fleeting. It was quickly broken by what sounded like a very large man loudly stomping up the stairs from the basement. Thus began the most terrifying experience of my life, during which I was certain that my life was in great danger. This person was not trying to creep around the house or be subtle. They made no attempt to hide the sound of their steps. They very deliberately and loudly clomped their way up the staircase like they were supposed to be entering this house at 3 a.m. Because of this, I thought perhaps the owner's husband had come home from his business trip early and didn't realize I was still there. I called out, "Hello," in a harsh, questioning way to indicate that I was not expecting anyone to be there. I was hoping it was the husband, and that he would maybe respond back, perhaps confused or apologetic for scaring me. But instead, there was silence. As my voice rang out, the steps stopped, and no words were spoken. I knew then that something was wrong. I got up from the bed and just stared at the crack in the door, waiting for something to happen. Then the timid female cat bolts into the room, meowing like crazy and winding around my legs, seemingly distressed. This cat was so timid that she would run away from me at the slightest noise or movement. But now she was so spooked that she was running towards me for comfort, even though I had been calling out aggressively and jumping out of bed. Then I knew that whoever it was not someone this cat was familiar with, and therefore no one who had any business being in that house. I went to bed, picked up my cell phone, and called 911. Then I picked up an iron, closed the bedroom door, and leaned against it. It had no lock, so I had to just hope they wouldn't try to push their way in. I was on the phone with the operator, and pretty certain my life was going to end. I was shaking so hard that the door was violently rattling in the frame. At one point, the operator told me to listen to what was going on, so I forced myself to stop shaking so I could hear. But when I heard movement, I let myself shake again so the door would rattle, and I wouldn't have to hear them walking around. If I was going to be killed by this person, I didn't want to go through the dread of hearing them walk towards me. Eventually, the cops showed up, and I had to dart out of the room and run to the front of the house to unlock the front door. They come in and spend all of 5 minutes searching this chaotically laid out, rambling house. One of them even commented, "It just keeps going," in disbelief. They didn't find anything. At first, I thought I must be going crazy because there was no question in my mind that I had heard the footsteps. But the police are telling me all the doors in the basement are locked. They ended up leaving, but because of all the rooms and furniture and weird little nooks and crannies in the house, I just felt like a 5-minute search was nowhere near enough to actually find someone who wanted to conceal themselves there. I ended up calling my mother at 3 a.m., crying, and she came over. Then I realized something. The intruder would have walked right past my obvious pile of cash on the kitchen table, and it was untouched. This made me think that they weren't there to burgle. I have often wondered if the person had been waiting for me to go to sleep, just hyping themselves up to come upstairs and do whatever the hell they were planning, and perhaps hearing me aggressively call out to them and call the cops deterred them that night. It terrifies me to think of what would have happened if I had been asleep, or what that person was planning. Having walked up the stairs so boldly like that when it was obvious that someone was home. We noticed the next day that the laundry room window in the basement was open. Apparently, the police hadn't even noticed. I searched the news in that area online, and there had been a break-in incident just weeks prior where a woman woke up in the middle of the night to an intruder sitting in the dark, watching her sleep, who proceeded to rape and badly assault her. I've been messed up over the whole thing since. This is a true story. When I was younger, I lived on the countryside of East Oklahoma with my mother and grandmother. From where we lived, it wasn't unusual to see nothing but dirt roads for 10 miles around. During the fall in the evening, I was out in the woods exploring the many hills around my house. Being a curious kid and all, I walked about a mile or so away from home until I came across an old red house sitting at the bottom of the hill. There was an old white truck sitting in the driveway, with what I remember looking like a burn pit not far away in the back. I was afraid of confrontation when I was younger, and it was going to get dark, so I decided I'm going to backtrack and just head back home. But just as I was walking away, I heard someone call, "He." It was a woman's voice, and I knew it was coming from the direction of the house. The thing is, there was no one outside, no one in the windows either. Not that I could see anyway. I didn't know if the voice was calling for me specifically. So I stood there and waited to see someone. No one showed, so I began walking away but kept my eyes on the house. Just as it was disappearing from my view, I saw an older woman with black hair and a brown and red dress come outside from the front door. She looked up at me and smiled, then pointed her finger directly at me. I didn't want to engage, so I acted like I didn't see her and continued on. I kept walking until my house came back into view, then started down the small hill, all while thinking about what dinner would be. That's when I heard the same hiye from before. It honestly sent a chill down my back. I thought the old woman had followed me all the way back home. I whipped around and scanned the trees, trying my best to spot someone. Instead, I only saw a large owl sitting in a tree about 10 feet off the ground. It didn't hoot or make any noise. It just stared directly at me, almost intently. In my culture, owls are bad omens, and typically when you hear them, it means someone you know is going to die. So anxiety filled me from seeing this owl and hearing the woman's voice. I wasn't going to stick around in the woods any longer and began walking more hurriedly. "Where are you going?" I heard the voice call from the woods behind me. I wanted to run so badly. Something in me kept telling me not to run. Do not show you are afraid. In my head, I kept thinking it was the owl. The owl is talking to me. This isn't an owl. I go inside to my grandmother, who is in the kitchen reading a magazine. I tell her, "Gram, there was an owl outside. I think it was talking to me." I knew she could tell I was afraid. Her eyes looked like she knew something I didn't. "Where were you? And where is it now?" she asked, standing up and pulling the curtains closed. I was walking in the woods and I saw a red house and an old lady. I pointed in the direction of where I went. "The owl is there." "I'm scared, Gram." She followed my finger, then walked into the other room to get my mom. "It's her. I know it is Amber. She's been coming more and more." My grandmother whispered angrily. My mother came over to me and said, "Baby, show me where the owl is." My mother smiled, but I could tell she was angry, perhaps even scared. She took my hand and led me out the door. I didn't want to go back outside, but I trusted my mother, so I went. "It was over there," I told her. She led me by the hand and gripped it tight. "Don't be afraid, Colty," she said. "Is that it?" At first, I didn't see what she was pointing at because at this time it was getting dark. But then I spotted it. "The same huge owl that's it," I whispered, afraid it would hear me. My mother bent down and picked up a rock the size of a lemon. "Bitch, stay away from my son." My mother chunked the rock hard. The owl, beginning to take off, got clipped in the wing by the rock, and I swear it was one of the most terrifying things I've ever heard. It made a screeching noise like a pig, then trailed off into what sounded exactly like a woman screaming. It flew off into the dark woods, and without another word, my mom took my hand again and led me back into the house. That night, I heard bits and pieces of my mom's conversation with my grandmother. Stuff like, "She's evil. She killed her husband, and she's a stakini. She was following my grandbaby." And the final part I heard made me terrified of the woods. "She eats hearts." The next day, my mother told me we were going to town, but had to stop somewhere really quick to check something. So we load up into our small car and drive down the dirt road for a bit, and we come up to a familiar sight. It was the red house. I thought, this is that old lady's house. I wonder why we are here. Then I began to scan the woods around us, looking for that owl, not as afraid since it was daytime. My mother knocked on the door and waited for a minute before the same old woman came outside. The old woman wasn't smiling. Instead, she looked at my mother like she hated her, and then I saw her turn to me with those piercing eyes. I couldn't hear what my mom was saying, but while I tried to listen, my eyes looked down at something that wasn't there yesterday. The old woman's arm was wrapped up in a bandage and a makeshift sling. It was then that it all clicked. She was the owl. It was her voice calling to me. I put my face in my hands because I didn't want to see her. To me, this woman was a real-life monster. I heard her slam her door, and my mom was getting back in the car. "Sorry, baby. We'll go now." I looked up as we were driving off, and thankfully, Didn't see her. Mom, was she that owl? I asked, feeling like I knew the answer fully well. My mother was silent for a bit. She said she was sounding angry again. That woman is our cousin. We don't ever talk to her. Then why did you talk to her? I asked. My mom looked at me for a split second and said, because of you. After that, she wouldn't answer any more of my questions regarding her and kept insisting that I drop it before she whoops my butt. Years later, I found out that the old lady's husband had died of a heart attack years prior. Soon after this all happened, she died, and I don't know how. Only my grandmother knew, and she's since passed as well. I still think about this sometimes, and how my grandmother's words still ring in my ears. The owl lady who was following me that day ate hearts.